Number 14. Carboot Eurorack. Poor man's modular. Number 14. Carboot Eurorack. Poor man's modular.
Hello, welcome back to Prrk Industries. Yes, Prrk. Today we're going to talk about something that's very expensive, but doesn't have to be. Euroracks are a very, very popular option for musicians, sound architects, designers, engineers, producers to come together and put different modular elements of electronics in order to create their own bespoke sound. I guess that's probably why it's so popular. Euroracks are pretty posh and therefore inherently pretty expensive. Take a quick look at this. The Pittsburgh Modular Lifeforms Foundation Evo, £3,439. Do you know what? I think I'll pass. I imagine buying modules could get quite moreish. People are probably quite interested in buying as many as they probably can, and I can't afford to do that. As much as I'm a DIY enthusiast and I enjoy getting the soldering iron out and making something, I really can't extend my budget to the extent of a whole modular rack. So I've been thinking, not that I was jealous or wanted any of this kind of stuff, but it got me thinking about the whole process of whether or not it would be possible to piece together your own. And you can. It's been done before. If we go back and have a look at Sam, my Look Mum No Computer, here he is. Sam will show you how to manufacture your very own modular synthesis setup, and here's a little still from one of his videos where he's walking through all the different things he's made. And Sam's great. He'll go and show you how to put together your own one and show you how to build oscillators and filters and even a frame to put the whole thing in. So if you wanted to make legitimate oscillators, filters, and maybe actually try and copy or mimic some of these Eurorack modules, then yeah, great stuff. You can have a go at doing that. But I was thinking about something a little bit different, and as always, repurposing, recycling, finding stuff that people don't want anymore is probably a bit more up my street. So what about the idea of repurposing throwaway items and making them as individual modules that you could then put in a rack and have them talk to each other? So lots of items can generate sounds. Actually, what the item is irrelevant. It doesn't matter too much, as long as it will have an in some cases, have an out in most cases, and plug into next door neighbour module and come up with some repurposing of the sound. So there are sort of two key categories really. You've got things that will generate a sound, and things that generate a sound could be toys. So for example, something as simple as one of these VTech toys will generate a sound and pass it on to something else potentially. What else? Well, you might go for the classic keyboard. Something like this would be able to obviously generate another sound. What else could we use? Well, sound effects machines, absolutely fantastic for generating bizarro noises. Excellent. Things like these voice recording devices as well, pretty good for that. There's a whole slew of Buddha machines that might be interesting to use as a sound source. Relaxation machines, so it's different sound effects: white noise, rain, lullaby, ocean, heartbeat. And these are great in particular because they've got a little SD card slot, so you can put your own sounds on the SD card, build that into a module to generate sounds. So that's the sort of first bracket, and you're only limited by your imagination pretty much in terms of what you want to use as a sort of sound generator. The next section is really thinking about what will affect that sound. So again, we can go back to other different types of sound processing toys, or again, anything throwawayable that may change the sound of a voice. So the classic voice changer, I'm a voice changer. Brilliant. You can use one of those. The circuit has an in, it has an out. Another example here, a kid's toy that is an alien voice. Again, comes with a jack in, and the speaker can be modified to become the out. What else have we got? I was thinking about using some kids' walkie-talkies to process the signal through the airways, basically, and get a nice lo-fi effect by having maybe that as part of a built-in module. So in terms of really generators and sort of sound effects, really go and dig, go and find some things at car boot sales, thrift stores, charity shops, whatever you want to call it. Go and find some things that you think might give you either a sound or will change the sound. So with that in mind, I started thinking about, well, how would I put this together as a rack? How would this work? And what I decided was a predetermined size of 150 millimeters for an upright. The panels can be as long or as short as you want. So this one, for example, is just a piece of hardboard because it's really, really cheap and you find it everywhere. You can repurpose that for next to nothing. You find that people just chuck this stuff out in the street. So a piece of hardboard would be a pretty good start. If you want to be posh, well, you could have a piece of acrylic. A piece of acrylic might look pretty cool on your rack. Again, it's the same height, it's 150 mil high, but make the length according to whatever it is that you're going to mount on top of it. And so I came up with a sort of array of different materials across different widths so that we can mount some of these things into a module. Once you've got those sorted, then you probably need some kind of frame. This is just a piece of repurposed MDF with a bit of backing plywood on it, and they've got holes screwed in for each of the modules then to be bolted in as such. So that's the sort of the bare bones, the structure of what it's all about. The frame, yeah, nice and straightforward to put together. The modules, nice and straightforward. You just need some screws to attach them. Most of the items for making sound or generating or modifying sound tend to be quite low voltage as well. The proper Eurorack equipment tends to have 12 volts plus, 12 volts minus, which requires you to buy a kind of posh power supply, again adding additional cost, and that's got to be regulated, etc, etc. So I was thinking about a nice easy setup where modular could work on a dedicated given power voltage supply, if you will. A lot of these toys tend to be 3 volts, 4.5 volts, and in some cases some have little disc cells and they're 3 volts as well, so they're all pretty much low voltage. So it got me thinking about something else that I've been playing with over the years a little bit and repurposing, and that's the whole notion of USB. And the protocol for USB is 5 volts. So if you take one of these, which is just your average cheapy mobile phone charging leads, this one's clearly broken, as you can see all the wires are all hanging out there. What you can do is just snip the end off one of these, quite straightforward, strip the ends off to reveal, normally it's 4 wires inside. Quite often, although not exclusively, the red and black one, oddly enough, are positive and negative. Quite often then you can then cut off the others and they're no use. So you've got positive and negative there, a constant 5 volts. You've then got a host which is USB. That USB then you can then think about plugging straight into a phone charger. You can plug it into a laptop computer. But if you've got every single module powered by one of these at 5 volts, you could then theoretically you could use a USB hub to extend the amount of power inputs that you want to use for each different module. Again, these are like £1, £2. You can buy them brand new if you want, but I wouldn't. You know, you can get these second hand for next to nothing as well. This one in particular has got, it's self-powered, so you can add a power supply, but you can take a feed from just your normal USB plugged into a power supply or computer, and then it's got a total of 2, 4, 6. It's got 8 USB outs that you can then use to power what you're going to then have as your sort of modules. So that's another useful way of doing things. Be careful though, because some things, for example, the voice box here is powered by the classic CR2032 cell. these 3 volts, but you need to be careful by putting in 5 volts, as you might damage it, as I believe I have with this one. So be very careful, either share voltage by putting a couple of these disc cell devices wired together in parallel, or if you want to, you can think about using a voltage regulator and use the voltage regulator to step the 5 volts down to 3 volts that you might require. I'll talk to you about some examples where I've done that a little bit later on. The next point in consideration is that you need to be able to join together all of these different sound generators and sound effects. And the sort of connection that I opted for was to just go for the normal mini jack. And the reason I went for this is lots of devices already have a mini jack to plug in. The normal headphone connection is pretty useful. It's pretty universal on lots of different things. I found that these stereo ones, which I have in mass for some reason, you can also use them as mono, and therefore my slew of female mono connectors, as you can see there, will be perfect in order to attach in and out. Of course, some things already have that headphone connection, so you don't need to wire them up. But the good thing about these female jack connectors is you can drill a hole through your module plate, and as you can see later on, you'll see how they're nice and straightforward to plug in and out in terms of making connections between your modules. So let's have a little look at some of the modules that we've made so far. Like I said, it's not supposed to be an exact copy on the budget of what a Eurorack is. The idea here was to repurpose rubbish that people are throwing away, people don't want, or things that are broken, and to turn them into a modular style poor man's car boot modular system. Basically, I don't want to particularly go and make a whole modular slew of oscillators and filters and sequencers. Well, that's possible. I wanted to see what I could make in terms of, initially anyway, repurposing some of these items. It ended up just being the start, because I found some other uses and other inroads. Again, we'll come back to that at the end. But for now, let's have a look at the 4 modules that I've built so far, what they do, and how that all sort of came together. Okay, so the first module that I put together was a combination of a couple of child's toys. The first one was a repurposed circuit taken from a Doctor Who voice changing mask. Again, I've seen a number of these in charity shops, and again, if you can get them for under a couple of quid, the circuit is probably worth it just for the processing of the ring modulator effect. What we did with this one was to put just the bare circuit board on show on the front, of which there are some vocal sound effects. And the tactile switches the tactile switches on the front you can just press with your, you don't need to have the membrane rubber over the top. It's quite a cool one. And what you can do with that is there's also an input right here, and you can take a feed from any given object you like and simply plug straight in, and you can go and find anything. So for example, if I wanted to go and source for example a Buddha machine, I could place the Buddha machine, just simply plug it in and turn on, and as we play that through, making sure the volume's high enough to trigger that. And a bit of reverb on the mixer just to bring out. And that works for all the different sounds. So that's the example of, as I friendly called it, Dr. WTF, for obvious reasons. It makes some pretty crazy sounds. The other strange one is the Crystal Maze, which was, I believe, a fairy princess's wand, or something along those lines. And the idea with this is that built into the circuit is some kind of tilt switch or a motion sensor. And when I plug this in, wired in parallel with that, I've also added a button. So a push to make button can go and trigger each of those sounds. Let me switch it back on again. And that's an example of one of the strange kids chuckling sounds. And all the LEDs come on in situ as well. Not the most useful, but it does make a few interesting sounds. That's god awful. So yeah, I still left the original speaker in so you can see it plays through without necessarily having to be plugged in. So that's pretty much example number 1 of the first module we made. If I just slide along what we've got so far, just to show you this one. Now, what we have here was probably the very first module we tried to build, and it had some limited success. So at the top here we had the emergency FX and mic kit. It was from a repurposed fire station toy. The 3 membrane switches here were for different sound effects, for sirens. Sadly though, when I wired it up to the 5-volt USB, this little surface mount resistor blew up and it stopped being of any use. The other one that ceases to be of any use is this one here. This is the Nature Bender, which does periodically make some sound. Let's try it. It's not the most reliable of the modules we've done so far. Let's plug it in there and see if it does anything. There are some tweets and chirps, and I added a circuit bent pitch dial. But again, it's not the most stable, and it quite often decides that it needs to switch itself off. So at that point, I thought, well, you know, what other sound sources can we come up with? And I had a bit of a think about cassettes again, and I'm a big fan of tape loops, a big fan of cassettes generally, and so decided to see if we could put together a cassette input source. And this is quite a nice cassette player. This one I think I was given at work. It is not just your average Walkman, it's got a built-in records feature which is quite useful. It's got a microphone input on the side, but best of all, without even having to modify it, has its own speed or pitch dial from fast to slow and to medium in the middle. And what it was to just took the front off so that I could put any type of tape loop I saw fit inside, and you can then go and play anything. So for example, let's go and find something that I've been playing with recently, some recordings I've made. What we can do is to take the normal out from the headphone of this, and that can then be played through, and you can then hear the tape. And that could be a normal tape, it could be a tape loop, and again, with the use of the speed control, what I actually found is that you could use that as a way of really changing up some of the different speeds that we have. So for example, here is a loop.
Friday night dreams. Tropical night weird dreams. Friday night dreams. Tropical night weird dreams. Friday night dreams.
So as you can see, there are benefits from the cassette as an input sort of source signal. And finally, these kids' toys that are quite popular at the moment are called Paper Jam. Now there are a wide variety of different types of Paper Jam toys. This one I like because it is more of a sound processing device. I bought this at a car boot sale for £1. Came with a microphone. What's really cool about it though is that on the side there are some useful functions that allow you to plug different things in and out. So there's a microphone in on the side here. There is a headphone out, on and off switch. It's got its own USB port, so rather than having to put batteries on the back, I can just power it straight from USB in the side. And there's this bizarre Ethernet cable, which I think allows you to do other things. I know that you can download and add different effects to it, so it's like modern trash, isn't it? It's like a throwaway modern trash toy. Designed for kids to screech into the microphone. It comes with its own inbuilt sounds. So if we plug it out, you can see that if I just turn down our reverb we've got here, you've got your own songs, which are god awful. But more interesting than that, it has its built-in effects. So, for example, if we take a feed out from the cassette player, which was that tape loop that you saw moments ago, and if I plug that in to the vocal effects, I'll be able to show you some of those in action. So if I put our tape loop on that we had before, and just try and switch off each of these effects. These are just sort of push button sensitive ones, surface membrane ones. So there's the tape player, and let's in addition to that, let's try and add some different types of effects to it. So
Friday night sweet dreams. Friday night weird dreams. 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 Friday night sweet dreams.
So there's a whole host of different effects here. They call them the melody match. There's a harmony. Chorus is quite, you can hear the chorus when that's activated. Vibrato. Perfect pitch, whatever the hell that might be. Auto, some kind of poor man's auto tune. And, oh no, there's auto tune, simply labelled auto. So the three songs are worth ignoring, but there's again a touch sensitive volume along the top, and there each of the different effects are there. So pretty much those are the first 4 modules that I've built. One of them is a bit of a letdown in the sort of emergency effects and the microphone, which I've had to probably take apart and bin. But so far, those are the first 4 that we've come up with. So with some sort of variable success, it's shown that actually, yeah, it's possible to make different type of modules, build a rack, find a sort of power supply system that works, and all of this from rubbish, from nothing. So actually I'm pretty surprised for a start. I'm pretty pleased with some of the results. Obviously the output levels are quite varied from all the different modules. Things like the cassette player are useful because it has its own built-in volume, so you can adjust that to suit. And you know, we're tapping into loudspeaker outputs from some of these toys, so some of them are a bit hot and they're a bit noisy, so I would suggest maybe running them through maybe a mixer or something along those lines, so that you could then sort of balance together the levels that you've got. And that started me thinking about something else. This is sort of really the start of a whole range of things that you could turn into modules. It doesn't necessarily have to just be things that we've repurposed. We've spoken already about using circuits, the Look Mum No Computer oscillators and filter circuits, but a lot of companies now manufacture circuits as a sort of projects that you might choose to do. So for example, the Racket company have built, this is one of their mixers that you can put together and build, which just so happened to feature mini jack inputs. So I was thinking that maybe if I took the Racket module, built into it its own little panel, that could sit as an onboard mixing device in the rack as well. So that might be a useful sort of processing device in order to get sort of volume levels right. Built to use 9 volts, I quite simply took another USB lead, chopped off the old phone cable, plugged it in, and it works quite happily at 5 volts. LED lights up and all the channels work as you would expect. So that was one of the first ideas I've sort of looked at where to go next. So the whole notion of using circuit boards that have been repurposed. Another one I'm going to look at is the thought processor, which you might have seen in one of my previous videos. That is going to be now built into a module all on its own, so that you can still play the sort of tactile PCB surface. It's still got a line out, it's still got a line in. Again, another fantastic idea, I think anyway, that I can use as a sort of module. And then my start to this was really starting to play with some of these. Again, you might remember the Sacred Sound, the resonant circuits review that we did on an old video. Those two circuit boards I found that I'd like to use more of, but certainly in a live context, if it's just rattling around in my case with my other bits and bobs, I'm going to destroy these circuit boards. I hadn't found a very good way of enclosing them, putting them into a case, so instead I thought I'd pair them up with this old thing, the Loud Objects sound generator. This is a sort of 8-bit generating noise, and these two make either pitch and time controlled tones, and based on a loop that's stored in a little 8-pin IC. So I decided to put all three on the same board. These again are all powered by little disc cells, and what I had to do was to bodge in a shared feed from the 5 volt and basically distribute the 5 volt across all three so as not to damage anything. So when I switch these on, you'll see that those light up quite happily, and that's the resonant circuits. But what I'll show you is what happens with the using the Loud Objects device. If I just go grab a feed here. If I plug this in, I can use this straight as a module. So that works pretty cool. Again, I can take a feed from Sacred Sound Geometry. It's a little bit quieter, so it's another use for the mixer. And so on and so on. So there is an example of something that we could use in terms of USB and circuit boards. So the next real phase is to think back to anything I've built in a circuit and to do a whole other rack. So we've got the charity shop car boot finds, the toys, the sound processors, and then a separate rack of things that we've built. That might be a circuit, that might be a project that I've bought from somebody else to put together, and to now start to assemble not just sort of car boot crap, but actually going beyond that a little bit more and be able to think about putting the two together. This sort of second whole notion of adding circuits to make them more tactile, make them more organised is not something that I really sort of thought about until we went through the process of making the first rack. So I imagine there'll probably be a video number 2 on this theme. If you're interested, leave us some comments, give us some feedback, any ideas for objects you'd like to see put into one of these different racks. Please, more than happy for suggestions for those sorts of things. Thanks for watching. As always, I've been Rusty, we are Prrk Industries, and we'll be back very soon, no doubt, with Poor Man's Modular or Carboot Eurorack. Thanks for watching.
Number 14. Carboot Eurorack. Poor Man's Modular. Number 14. Carboot Eurorack. Poor Man's Modular.